続きまして R3 社からリカルド・コレイヤ氏による講演です。ステート・オブ・ CBDC と題しまして CBDC の最新の情報をお届けいたします。Would you please start presentation, Ricardo?
Thank you. Okay. Yokoso Korede e. I think I said that right. Thank you very much for coming, everybody. I'm very excited to be here. We love Japan, a very important market for us. So I have 25 minutes. I'm going to talk to you about some of the work that we've been doing and how we see the evolution of money. I'm going to try and stick to time here, so I'm going to put on a timer. And Bruno, keep me honest in the room there. Thank you very much. Quick introduction into who I am and R3. Most of you would know R3, but I thought I'd spend just a few minutes just covering kind of the intro. So I've been with R3 for 8 years, since the beginning more or less, about 4 months into it. For the last 4 years, I've been looking at digital currencies, mainly CBDCs. We work with around 40 to 45 central banks around the world, including the BIS, the IMF, and the World Bank. And so we've gone very, very deep and very wide in trying to understand how money is changing and what the evolution of money looks like in the future. So a quick history of R3. I'm not going to spend too long. We were founded in 2015. In 2016, we released the first version of Corda. When we were founded, the question was, what is blockchain and can we use it for finance? And can commercial banks and central banks leverage this new technology? I think initially there was more fear than excitement because of Bitcoin and because of Ethereum that was starting to take shape. Ethereum launched in 2014, as some of you will know. And so by 2016, we realized that we couldn't use Bitcoin or Ethereum. And so we took bits of Bitcoin and little bits of Ethereum. We were inspired by both of these, and we built out Corda. And over the years, we've innovated and incrementally changed how kind of an enterprise DLT might work based on everything that we've learned. So today, what I'd say is that R3 is focused on 4 key things: central bank digital currencies, working with our central banks; deposit tokens or tokenized deposits, as you guys may have heard, for commercial banks and also private entities. So public money, private money, and digital assets. So we have some of our team here this week on digital assets, and you guys would have seen the tokenization of everything. Real estate, securities, bonds, what have you. And then of course, interop. One of the key concerns that we have is building a world that is even more siloed than the world that we have today, right? So, if you build on one platform, today those assets are typically locked in that platform. So how do we make sure that we build a world where assets can move freely and money can move freely? So interop is a really big deal for us today. So just to give you a little bit of an overview of R3, R3 has these key components. So at the bottom end of R3, we have Corda, which is the underlying digital ledger technology or blockchain. Corda 4 was our previous kind of design and version of our platform. It was built with a very different philosophy to Corda 5. Corda 4 was built with a philosophy that every commercial bank in the world would have one node behind the firewall, and that node would connect to all the other nodes. Corda 5 takes the assumption that we will have a network of network architectures, a little bit like the internet, where assets will flow freely between these different networks, a little bit like data on the internet. And it's cloud native, meaning that it is very scalable and it is able to burst into cloud as well as behind the firewall. Above that, we have tokenization, we have digital assets, and we've got digital currencies, which is going to be the focus of my talk here for the next 20-odd minutes. And then, of course, we work with, as you can see, the banks, the central banks, financial service providers, FMIs, exchanges, kind of anyone in the financial services industry, more or less, including payment providers. So let's focus on digital currencies in particular, and we'll start with a very big global overview of what we see happening around the world. And I'll start here with this gentleman, Andrew Bailey, who's the governor of the Central Bank of England, the Bank of England. And just recently in July, he had a speech in London, and the question was, is there a future for enhanced digital money? Is there a future for the evolution of money? Keeping in mind that we haven't evolved money for hundreds of years. It's had the same format paper and coins typically. Of course, if you look further into history, money has changed from shells to stones to what have you, but the form of money that we have today has not been innovated on for hundreds of years. So this is a seminal question. And the conclusion is that likely there is an opportunity for us to innovate on money. At the beginning of the year, though, the Central Bank of England, the Bank of England, had suggested that a retail CBDC was unlikely in the UK. The tone has changed. So now the Bank of England is suggesting that there is likely an opportunity for a retail CBDC to be issued into the UK, into England, by the end of this decade. So we can see that the tone is changing even amongst the largest economies, the more advanced economies, and that is an interesting point. And so much so that, you know, Hyun Song-shin, who we admire dearly, we follow the work from the BIS, he is the economic advisor and the head of research, just recently also suggested that, you know, throughout history, innovation and the transformation of the monetary system has coincided with major leaps in growth. And tokenization today is likely going to be the next big development and that big leap forward. So tokenization of things is really the subject that we are looking at, and you know, digital currencies is just one version of tokenization, of course digital assets as well, as we've talked about. And so what is the view? What's the idea behind central bank money? Before I go through these points, I will say that, you know, we started off with the view that central banks might be fearful that they may be losing the tools that they have today to enact and transmit monetary policy. How do you transmit monetary policy if the instrument that you have deployed into the economy is not being used? And we're all using Bitcoins and Ethereums and other crypto assets, right? So the central banks may have some FUD motivations, fear, uncertainty, and doubt. But the vision certainly that we are seeing from most of the central banks is promoting healthy stability within the economy. So how do you ensure stability? Well, you need to be able to have your levers to control and transmit monetary policy. But the other motivations are innovation. So we see Kazakhstan, for example, really pushing on the innovation agenda, saying that, hey, you know, these territories, countries that are developing may be able to leapfrog developed countries with these new technologies. Not just blockchain, but AI, of course. You've seen the tremendous growth of AI just recently through transformers. You know, one key point of that technology has really unlocked that potential. So innovation and growth and empowering the private sector is another key point. And then having a trusted sovereign instrument in order to transact, right? Today we have other instruments that may not be trusted, may not be sovereign. And so the central banks want to be able to participate, right? You guys have all heard of Web3. You guys have all heard of the metaverse. How do these banks, the central banks, participate in that kind of world where all those instruments are digital? Web3, in our view, has three key components: digital identity, sovereign, digital money, and digital assets. So the central banks really do need to figure out how they participate in what we believe is a growing digital world, right, and a digital economy. And then leadership, establishing leadership in Web3, and as I said, being able to participate. Okay, so the global state of play. If anyone is interested in understanding kind of the detail of where we are with CBDC research, do have a look at that link at the bottom of the page, the Atlantic Council, because they have a really good source of information. It's not 100% correct. It's about 90% correct, I'd say, but it's directionally correct. And here you can see all the dots across the world of all the projects that are going on today in CBDC. So just a quick question to the audience. I know that typically you guys don't like to participate, but I'm going to ask the question anyway. So where do we believe is the most active region today in terms of the research and the development of CBDC? Is it Europe? Is it Asia, APAC? Some believe that Asia certainly has done tremendous work around CBDC research, MAS in particular, the Bank of Thailand. The US maybe? North America? South America? No? South America? Yes, some good work going on around the Brazil and Colombia. Or the European region, perhaps. Lots of work going on in Europe, ECBs and Bank of England's and so on. So in our view, this is the heat map. The Middle East today, and excuse the pun, is the hottest region on earth. And the reason is you see the Abu Dhabi Central Bank, the Saudis, Qatar more recently, Oman, and other areas, other countries within the MENA region really pushing on that innovation agenda, trying to get out of, petrodollars and trying to innovate and become the next digital hubs and the new Silicon Valleys. Some of you would have seen the development of Project Neom, a city that's cutting through the desert, fully digital, right? Digital identity, digital money, and work continues and accelerates within that region at a tremendous pace. So today, the Middle East really is a really exciting region for us, and we're doing some really exciting, tremendous work there. Okay, this is just a snapshot. I'm not going to go through the detail of all of these projects. As you can see, the projects are broken down into the red projects are central bank digital currency, so public money, right? Central bank projects. And the blue are commercial bank projects and commercial bank money. And I suppose what's interesting to see is kind of the footprint. So lots of work that's been going on in CBDC over the last, I'd say to you, 5 odd years. But there's a growing amount of work going on with commercial bank money. And there's many different motivations for that, and we'll see some of that in a minute. But I'd suggest that, in the next probably 2 years, that picture will change, and you'll see a growing blue space where more and more private commercial bank money will start to be researched and developed as banks start to think about how they work in collaboration with their commercial and central banks, right, in issuing private money. Okay, so other global trends. We do see an accelerated path to production, predominantly by the Middle East, but also growing in APAC, right? So the work that has been done in Asia Pacific has been tremendous. I'd say that APAC, when we first started to do our work, was the hottest region on earth, right? So lots of work, as I said, from particularly the AMS and others. But path to production is accelerating. We suspect that in the next 2 to 3 years, we'll start to see some production CBDCs from some of the larger G20 countries. And policy as well, policy and regulation. Certainly here in Japan, you guys are leading in certain areas around regulation of stablecoins, right? So in particular in June, some really clear regulation in terms of what can and can't be done, and we're already starting to see the result of some of that with some really interesting projects around the release of stablecoins. So policy is starting to really drive production projects, because now we know what the guardrails are, and we know that we're not going to crash and burn into anything that we shouldn't be doing. And we've also started to get some confidence on what kind of model CBDCs and tokenized deposits will take. In the early days, there was a lot of fear about direct issuance of CBDC from the central bank to us. The central bank all of a sudden transmits CBDC directly to our phones and displaces the commercial bank. Obviously, that carries a bunch of concern around AML, KYC, CTF, and all these costly obligations. And so the model that's emerged is really kind of interesting. It's a two-tiered intermediated, and we'll cover that in a minute. And the other thing that we're seeing in terms of a global trend is accelerated collaboration, really heightened collaboration within region. So yesterday we met with the Bank of Japan. All the central banks are talking to each other, and they're talking to each other more than they have, particularly because, as I mentioned, the first time in a few hundred years, we're starting to really think about how we change the format of these instruments. So accelerated global collaboration is also something that we're seeing regionally and globally. Okay, so some of the motivations I mentioned that we would talk about. So monetary, rather than go into everything, I'll give you some of the key highlights. So stability and resilience, I mentioned that already, creating a stable, resilient economy, being able to participate and transmit monetary policy. Sovereignty is another big theme that we see throughout most of these projects in the advanced economies, and being super efficient, especially when we think about the capital markets, right? So T0, T2 to T1 rather, you see that trend of exchanges trying to shorten the settlement window and trying to become more efficient. Programmability is across the board, right? The notion of smart money, right? Programmable money, programmable payments, right? This is a very big theme and has a lot of promise, but it's a double-edged sword, right? So we have to tread very carefully, but this is a really big theme and a big motivation for some of the central banks. And then we talked about innovation and interop, and of course we shouldn't exclude inclusion and offline, right? So lots of work going on around the inclusion piece, and offline is a very big component for inclusion. Another very busy slide, and so I won't go through all of this. We picked out a few of the key global projects, and we started to look at, what is the benchmarking of some of these things, and this is what we learned, right? So we learned that the tech is mainly DLT, right? So the distributed ledger really is a key point. Some projects, like the ECB, are embarking on a central-based solution, which is fine. But most projects, even in the ECB though, some of the national banks are starting to lobby for distributed models versus just central models. Most of the projects we see are distributed, and there's many good reasons for that. We won't cover the details of that here today, but please come and find me afterwards if you're interested in understanding why. The model is a two-tiered model, as I explained. Two-tiered, intermediated. That is the common model that's emerging, which means that the commercial banks maintain their status quo, maintain their position. They continue to run AML, KYC, but there are still some questions around deposits. Will some of the deposits corrode, and will they corrode in the short term, but may they increase in the medium to longer term, right? Still lots of work going on there. And then there's this mix between tokens and accounts. I mean, I don't know if any of you have been involved in this space at all, but we've been talking about tokens and accounts for the last 6 years. Which one do we use? What's better? What's worse? All payment systems in the world today are accounts-based except Bitcoin, right? So we believe that a token-based CBDC and a token-based deposit token is the way to go because it represents and replicates cash. It's a bearer asset, right? It's an instrument that can settle in real time immediately, and it has a whole bunch of really interesting properties that we believe is the right way to go, but still there is a mix. And interop, we talked about. Interop is absolutely fundamental. We need to make sure that if I take out a digital token and I hand it to any one of you in the room here today, you'll be able to accept that money, right? Regardless of what platform or what token you may have in your pocket. And then non-interest bearing. So there was a lot of discussion, should these forms of money be interest bearing? Cash is not interest bearing, it carries no interest. But now does the central bank have the opportunity to create interest bearing instruments? The default is we can't do that. The central banks will not do that because they will displace the commercial banks. Commercial banks have the opportunity of adding interest, right? Have the opportunity of adding overlay services, and that's the value proposition that the commercial banks have. If the central banks did that, they would displace the commercial sector. Okay, so that was a quick overview of some of the key themes, what's going on around the world, some of the things that are starting to kind of come into the foreground. I'm going to speed up a little bit because I've just got the hand wave from my friend here, Bruno. So the unified ledger. This model is being promoted by the BIS pretty heavily. It takes concepts from the regulated liability network, from our friends at Citi, right? You guys should have a look at that paper. It's kind of interesting. The key concept is, can we create a model for the coexistence of public and private money? And this notion of the singleness of money. If I bank with MUFG and you guys bank with SMBC and some other folks bank with whoever, all those forms of money need to be completely interoperable. And so the singleness of money within jurisdictions is really important. And then again, the theme of the two-tiered intermediated. So this is the conceptual model as presented by the BIS pretty much. And so I'll cover it real quick. It's one ledger with many partitions. Oh, I think I have a clicker over here. Does this work? Yeah, one ledger with many partitions, partition 1, 2, 3, 4. And this is one ledger where you have public money and private tokenized deposits by each institution, and this instrument is used for settlement and singleness, right? Nice and clean, nice and easy, presents a cool macro view of what a new domestic system might look like. And then of course you've got your assets, capital markets, other markets, and these global trade networks that are emerging that can also now take advantage of these cool instruments that are available through Interop. However, there are concerns. There is a technology risk concern. One big ledger would be one technology, one vendor. We don't want that, right, necessarily. it's also a single point of failure. You attack one network, you take the whole system down. There's also this honeypot issue, right? One network, one big data source, right? You can attack the network, you get through the front door, now you have access to all the data within the network, so it creates these risks, and of course governance becomes a tremendous big issue, trying to create governance across such big networks. So there is a new way perhaps to think about this, where we can have not one network, but many, like independent network for public money, independent network for bank 1, bank 2, bank 3, they have all their own networks, and then these various networks on the side, all sitting within a virtual unified ledger, right? And what that represents, or what that gives us, is multiple independent networks, multiple technologies. The Bank of Brazil, for example, is implementing this model, right? So you're using Bezu over here, you're using Quarter over here, it doesn't matter, so long as these things are interoperable, right? And it gets rid of the honeypot, it gets rid of the risk on the technology, and it gets rid of the single point of failure. And of course, it provides better resilience, better stability, and interop is really key. Okay. A quick wholesale overview. I'm gonna go through these pretty quick. You guys will have access to this information, so by all means, dig into the data. But you know, the key wholesale, we hear wholesale, we hear retail, we hear cross-border. This covers kind of a quick view of what some of the key wholesale use cases are and what some of the retail use cases are. So security settlement, our friend in the room, Marcus over there standing at the back, is a capital markets guy, and security settlement is the big deal, right? So if we can tokenize assets and we can tokenize money at the same time, we can then be able to get to this notion of real-time settlement, right? And move from T2 to T1. Cross-border payments, this of course is a massive one. You know, there is a G20 mandate to make cross-border payments faster, cheaper, more transparent, and we've never had a better opportunity than today to be able to facilitate and enable that. So that's a really big one for us. And of course, deposit tokens for you guys, the commercial banks, to issue new forms of smart money, right? And look at things like institutional regulated DeFi. That's really exciting stuff. And so some of the key design choices: private permission chains, law is law, code is not law, tokens are the way to go, not accounts in our opinion. Decentralized creates this notion of resilience, stability, and user wallets versus universal wallets seem like the way to go, meaning that if you have the MUFG banking app today, tomorrow that app should just be updated to hold these new tokens for you. You don't have to go and download a new application and think about all this change. It just simply is available on the devices that you use today. A quick view on retail. I'm not going to go through all of these, but in the retail space, you know, the dematerialization of assets, right, and fractionalization of the assets is really, really exciting. You know, we've in the retail space, it's hard for us to access these really big investments, but as we start to fractionalize and dematerialize these things, we can now invest in airplanes and rocket ships and whatever else will be available because we're fractionalizing these assets. So these things are pretty cool. And then, you know, programmable money, regulated DeFi, as I mentioned, you know, programmable payments is a big deal, and this notion of purpose-bound money and purpose-bound tokens, right? So lots of cool kind of stuff across the retail space that we're seeing. But let's just get to a quick summary because I've just been given the heads up that my time is up. So in summary, production in the next 2 to 3 years, certainly we feel that. We've been working in this space for a long time, and that's where we're going. The growth in deposit tokens, so you guys, the commercial banks, have a tremendous opportunity to accelerate that and introduce new forms of money. Digital assets, we hope that Marcus does his job right, and we have growth of digital assets within the financial sector and the exchanges. But velocity of this alignment is key, making sure that we digitize assets and digitize money at the same time to be able to facilitate settlement. Otherwise, we're always going to be falling back to current rails and current systems. Interop, I think I've said that more than I've said anything else. It's absolutely fundamental, and more regulation will help us to accelerate. So thank you very much. Arigato gozaimasu.